Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into a city that literally millions of people visit, but honestly, very few truly understand: Kyoto. You know, behind all those gorgeous temples and bustling modern storefronts, there is this incredible, entirely hidden history of urban design. We're gonna decode the secret blueprint of this ancient capital together, and I promise you, it might just change the way you look at city maps forever. So, right off the bat, let's tackle a massive question, one that really defines the very soul of this place. Who actually designed the ancient streets of Kyoto? Was it these all-powerful, strict emperors laying down rigid laws from above? Or was it the everyday people, the citizens, who subtly rebelled against those rules to build the vibrant communities they actually needed? Well, to figure that out, we've got to rewind the clock over 1,000 years. Section 1. The Grand Spiritual Boundaries. Okay, so the planners of ancient Kyoto didn't just throw a dart at a map. Before we even talk about houses or roads, we have to look at the macro level, because this city was anchored by pure myth. They believed the capital absolutely needed to be protected by the 4 guardian spirits from Chinese mythology. In the east, you had the blue dragon, represented by the flowing Kamo River. Out west, the white tiger mapped perfectly to the Seinine Road. The black tortoise of the north was anchored by the Funoa Kayama Hill. And finally, down south, the vermilion bird was symbolized by the massive Ograike Pond. These 4 landmarks completely dictated the grand, natural borders of the entire ancient capital. And what's truly mind-blowing here is the sheer physical scale of those boundaries. We are talking about a massive footprint spanning roughly 4.5 kilometers from east to west and over 5 kilometers from north to south. Slicing right down the absolute center of this colossal space was Suzaku Avenue. This was an unfathomably large main street, measuring roughly 84 meters wide. But pinning down exactly how they decided on these specific borders, it's kind of like a historical puzzle. There's this 14th century text called Surzuragusa, and it notes, the Toba Road wasn't named after the Toba Palace was built. It's an old name. I love this because it beautifully illustrates how these ancient, existing roads stretching way south of that massive Suzaku Avenue acted as these crucial, almost mysterious benchmarks for the city's early borders, long before the grand palaces were even constructed. Section 2. The strict imperial grid. So now that we understand the mystical mountains and rivers guarding the borders, let's transition right down from the heavens into the cold, mathematical rigidity of the imperial city plan. This brings us to a foundational concept called Jobo-sei. Basically, this was a super rigid, Chinese-inspired urban system made up of grid-like blocks and intersecting avenues. The crucial thing to remember here is that this was a totally top-down system. It wasn't organic at all. It was an exercise in intense control, literally meant to keep the new capital perfectly, mathematically organized. And to achieve that level of control, the planners laid down exactly 20 major avenues. 11 of these grand avenues ran east to west, and 9 ran north to south. These perfectly intersecting lines created a massive, inescapable grid that chopped the metropolis right down the middle, dividing it into the left capital and the right capital. But here is where we see a really fascinating twist. While this system was totally inspired by China, Kyoto's grid had a unique, slightly more open Japanese adaptation. See, in China, every single city block was heavily walled off. But in Kyoto, these walled blocks, which featured these beautiful roofed walls known as Tsuijebe, were only built near that central Suzaku Avenue. The rest of the city was left slightly more open, which, as we'll see, perfectly set the stage for the unique culture that was about to sprout up. Section 3. Inside the city blocks. All right, we've seen the giant grid. Now we're going to zoom in even further. From those grand avenues, right down to the individual housing plots where everyday citizens actually lived. Think of this spatial system like a giant Russian nesting doll. The city was divided into major avenues and megablocks called Jo and Bo. Those were chopped down into quarters called Ha. Those quarters were then divided into smaller blocks called Machi. And finally, those were sliced all the way down into single house plots called Ikonushi. The mathematical precision enforced inside this grid was absolutely relentless. A single boom mega block was roughly 550 meters square. Inside that, a machi block was about 120 meters square, and this went right down to the microscopic scale of a single family's lot, the ikonushi, which was strictly measured out to be a narrow rectangular plot. You absolutely could not just build wherever you felt like it. And the government made sure you stayed in your box. Local officials known as bucho and borei actively monitored these perfectly partitioned neighborhoods. You've got to remember, this wasn't just about making the city look pretty. This layout was a highly effective tool for strict imperial control. It made it incredibly easy to track the population, enforce the rules, and, most importantly for the empire, collect taxes. Section 4. Citizens reclaim the streets.
So you have this incredibly rigid, mathematically perfect top-down system. But humans, well, we aren't math equations. Over the centuries, a massive shift happened as everyday people began to creatively dismantle this control. In the 8th century, early markets were strictly confined inside specific blocks. But fast forward to the 12th century, and trade started naturally spilling outward, physically migrating right into the north-south street alleys. By the Sengoku period, the rigid block system had basically collapsed, and the modern dori, or street culture, officially took over. People just stopped living inside those walled blocks and started living their lives out on the road.
This dynamic right here, it perfectly illustrates the core conflict. On one side, you have the planned city, imperial rules, rigid squares, and total top-down control. But fighting against it is the lived city, citizen culture, bustling streets, and organic bottom-up communities. The government desperately wanted the city to be all about the blocks, but the people decided, nope, the city is about the streets. The citizens literally became rule-breaking urban hackers. They practiced this thing called kosho, which was them actively hacking the grid by taking over public roads and turning them into private farmland or homes. They also built zushi, which were entirely new, totally unplanned, and technically completely illegal back alleys that sliced right through the government's perfect squares just so people could connect to their communities. They physically reshaped the map from the ground up. Section 5. Kyoto's living ancient legacy. This brings us right up to the present day. How did this ancient clash between strict planners and rebellious citizens create the modern Kyoto we see today? Well, for starters, the quote-unquote perfect grid turned out to be surprisingly fluid. The city was always a living, breathing organism. Historical records show that over time, the northern border of the massive imperial palace actually shifted 200 meters, and that little move forced the renaming of entire major avenues. The strict math simply had to bend to reality. But get this, the imperial planner's dream didn't completely vanish. Take a look at these names: Doda, Kyogyo, Junpu, Ane, Sujin. These were the original Chinese-inspired names for those massive, ancient bow blocks. And they haven't disappeared. If you travel to Kyoto right now, you will find these exact ancient names being used as the modern public school districts. Kind of amazing, right? Ultimately, though, the street culture absolutely won the war. Just look at ancient street names like Moramachi, Nishikikoji, and Nishinotoin. Because everyday people actively chose to build their lives, their markets, and their communities out on the streets rather than staying hidden inside those assigned blocks, these street names survived the fall of the empire. They thrived, and they're permanently cemented onto the map for modern travelers to walk to this very day. So, as we wrap up this explainer, it leaves us with a pretty massive question. Next time you step outside, I want you to look at the layout of your own neighborhood and ask yourself, are our modern cities truly shaped by the planners who draw the rigid lines on a map, or by the people who organically walk, live, and hack those streets every single day? Thank you so much for joining me to uncover Kyoto's hidden blueprint. Keep questioning the world around you, and we'll see you next time.